Thank you all for joining. I'm Kristen Raven. I'm president of the Northwest Screenwriters Guild. And thank you for being here today and being part of this wonderful community of screenwriters. So just a little housekeeping information. I did mute you all, but if you want your video on or off, that's your choice. Later, we hope to have a little time for audience questions, but in the meantime, you can feel free to use the chat window too. So in today's panel, we will connect with some of the real gatekeepers of Hollywood, whose job it has been to raise your scripts to the next level or send them to the digital black hole. For example, you send your script to a contest. Well, who's on the other end? What do they look for? Well, you're about to find out. So first, let me introduce our moderator tonight, Brian Howell. Brian is a Seattle area writer and filmmaker who has worked at Xbox and Lucasfilm writing video game scripts and is currently the senior manager of a video production team at Microsoft. He is also a recent finalist of the Seattle Film Summit Short Script Competition, so he must know a little bit about what a reader wants. You will be able to watch his winning script read during the summit, so make sure you check out all the events happening during that festival. Congratulations, Brian. And now I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce and welcome our panelists.
Thanks very much, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Super happy to be here. Really excited about the panel tonight. We've got three really knowledgeable guests that have a lot of experience in the industry doing what we all wish we knew how to handle better, which is taking our scripts and looking at them and deciding if they are worth producing or going further in a contest or not. So I'm going to, without much further ado, introduce Tom Peterson, Jim Picariello, and Diane Mettler. And I'll let each of them talk a little bit about themselves, including what type of reading they've done, whether it's for contests or studios or just for fun, and how they got into being script readers. All right, Tom, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm Tom Peterson. I'm currently the manager of the Bachelor's in Digital Filmmaking at Olympic College over in Bremerton. I was an intern as a reader for Atmosphere Entertainment. They produced 300 and several other pretty well done movies that did very, very well. For them, I specialized in reading action sequences and action scripts. I read nothing but features, and I graduated at one point from doing general coverage, which consisted of about 5 to 10 pages of coverage, to doing detailed coverage, which included writing as much as a 35-page treatment for scripts. And in some cases, it was for scripts that I probably never should have read, and that had it been me, I would not have read initially. But that happens when, you know, the boss knows somebody and says, read this. So there we go.
All right, thanks, Tom. Jim, let's move to you next.
So my name is Jim Picariello. I'm all the way over in Maine, so I'm waving to all of you from the other side of the country. And I've been a screenwriter for 8 or 10 years now, self-taught, and at a certain point, I was hooked on going to the Austin Film Festival every year, but one year I just couldn't afford it. And my buddy, who was a reader for the festival, said, you could read for your ticket. And so I did that for 2 years, where, and I'll talk about my experience later, but that's pretty much how I got into that experience, and it's an unreal amount of reading, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Excellent, thanks, Jim. All right, last but not least, Diane Mettler. Diane, take it away.
Hi, I've been writing for years and years and taught screenwriting for about 20, I think, last 7 at the UW, and did lots of student reading. When I got my script produced at Hallmark, I volunteered the WGA starting about 2010 to read for the WGA's contest for their scripts. So I get to read every year their series for cable and their movies for cable. I'm one of their judges. So now I get to read a lot of those too. And I put in a lot of hours reading scripts. So that's kind of where I'm at. And yeah, that's me.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Diane. So one theme that I'm definitely picking up on across all three of our panelists is the idea that there's a lot of reading involved with being a reader, which, is shocking. So let's just kind of go back the other direction. Let's start with Diane this time and ask, when you say a lot of reading, what does that feel like in a week? What does the week of a reader break into?
Well, if I'm teaching a class, that's probably 15 pages per student times 20 students. And if I'm reading for a contest, that can be anything from 100 to a series can be 500 pages, and they want you to read 5 series in 2 weeks. So, it can be an intense amount of reading when you're doing a contest. But then, that's when you're doing it, it's intense. When you're not doing it, it's not that much. So,
Jim, how does that line up with your experience?
Well, for the Austin Film Festival specifically, their ticket for a producer's ticket, which gives you some meals, you have to read 60 features, and then it's broken down where it's the equivalent amount of pages really for either short scripts or short stories or however the plays. They have a variety of things that you can kind of pilots that you can request. But for me, I mostly was reading features, and you have a few months to do it. Nobody ever takes those few months to do it. We all cram at the end. I'm sure some people do, but it's a good amount of time. And on top of that, on top of reading each script, there's a minimum number of words per section for coverage or for our opinion on how setting is, or plot and structure and overall. And when all is said and done, it could take 20 minutes or a half hour just to write each piece. So 60 features, which is it's when you're not doing it for a living, it's a lot of reading.
I want to dig in a little deeper there, Jim. So when you say you're writing, the coverage for each of the different sections of a script, and actually, Diane, I'd love to get your opinion on this too. Is this stuff that the writer sees, or is this stuff that is just used to determine whether or not the script is going to move further up the food chain?
In the last few years for the Austin Film Festival specifically, the writers always see, I think, all the overall review, and then they can pay for all of it. I can't remember. It changed in the last couple of years, but for the most part, they either they are going to see it or they have the ability to see it at some point.
Gotcha.
And so you have to, they try to do an okay job policing you, and so you're not being mean, because some people could be like, this is terrible, which we don't want to do.
Right. Or you do want to do, but you're not supposed to.
Yeah, you thoroughly want to do it.
Totally want to do it.
We'll get into that later.
So Diane, how does that line up with your experience doing your?
For students, I do a lot. It is probably 3 times the reading and giving feedback than it is the teaching. It is the bulk of the class. Every script's different, and unless they get feedback, you don't grow, I don't think. So as a screenwriter, and that's kind of why they're taking the class. And I think sometimes students can hear it but don't understand why it's not hitting the marks. So that's your job, is to try to get it into writing so they can absorb what's going wrong or right. You need to let people know so their stuff they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I would say I'd probably spend more time on the writing end than the reading, maybe.
Gotcha. Oh, that's interesting. So Tom, taking it from a different angle, since you were a reader for a studio, what's your experience as a reader like, and how does it maybe vary from someone who's reading for contests?
It actually, it's very similar, with the exception of the fact that the people that I'm reading for are the people who may do the production. And so it never actually gets back to, as anybody who's ever submitted a script to a production company knows, it's very rare that you would ever hear from them to say, oh, we didn't like it because. It's just going to be a simple, we didn't like it, or we're not interested, or even worse, well, we're already doing something like that, which means they probably didn't even read it. The coverage that I wrote could be more brutal. But I didn't like doing that. I didn't think that it was fair to the potential writer. And a lot of times the other part of it that was very important is what I was also reading for was to see whether or not the writer himself or herself, obviously, may just be hired as a writer, not necessarily for the script that they wanted to have produced, but because they're a good writer. And so that put a slightly different twist on things. A lot of times I do a lot of fun reading for students that are in our program, and I do very much the same sort of thing with them. It may not be a great script, but in that not so great script, you can see hints of somebody who has the potential to be a great writer. And I think that, you know, what I want to do is bring out those great writers, because I think, you know, not enough people get that opportunity. And it's just very important. And it helps if you do get the feedback to know that the story may not have been the best story, but the writing behind it was good.
So that's interesting in that I think for some people who have entered contests, I think their experience has been, you know, maybe they do pay the extra money and they do get those notes. And so there's kind of an expectation that, okay, I entered the script, I paid my fee, I'm going to get the notes back and I'll get to see what I see. For submitting to a production house, that's, like you said, not generally the experience. You might just send it to the production house and get a very polite no thanks back from them. Exactly. So when that conversation does become, hey, we are interested in this script, or we're not interested in the script, but we are interested in this writer, what's that conversation like? Do you participate in that conversation? Does that get handed off to someone else and they talk to the writer? How does that work?
To somebody else, and normally it's one of the production executives, and depending upon who the person is and how they came into the system, it could be anywhere from just a creative director to the head of the production company. Mm-hmm. I know of at least one writer that I didn't have anything to do with them, but that happened with them, and they were contacted by the creative director, and the creative director basically said, we read your script, we don't like your story, but we like you as a writer. We've got something we think you might be able to work on, here, give it a shot. You've got however many days they gave them, I'm not really sure, and get it back to us and let us know what you think. And there are an amazing number of jobs for people who pretty much will never ever see their stuff get produced, but stuff that they've worked on gets produced because the writers that we were looking for, I might grade them on their ability to write dialogue, and that could be really high, but their ability to write an action scene may be low. And what they're looking for at that time is somebody who can write action. And so that person would get thrown out, unfortunately. But if they were looking for someone to write just dialogue, that may be who they'll bring in to punch up the dialogue in a script that they do like.
So are you saying that you would, as a reader, tend to focus on one kind of specific area? And were there other readers that were focusing on other areas, or was that just kind of your specialty?
I knew there were.
Okay.
I was working remotely. I was working in Las Vegas at the time, and the production company was in LA. But I'd sit in on calls periodically with them, and I would hear other people that I was assuming were readers because of the comments that they were making as well. But for the most part, I didn't have any contact with other readers. It was, I was siloed. And so whatever I produced was what I produced.
Diane and Jim, let's start with you, Diane. How does that contrast with your experience with contests? I know that, there's not just one reader for a contest, unless it's a very, very small contest. So do you work directly with other readers? Do you compare notes?
The Writers Guild,
arm wrestling matches?
The Writers Guild, I don't. They just send me, literally comes in a box. I mean, probably you have to read that many scripts for Austin, it's the same deal. I mean, it just comes literally in just stacks and stacks of these things. And they want you to grade it on merit, but they do tell you where you fall in you're the first reader section, the second reader, you're the final read. They just let you know there what you're doing. And you have to rate it in different ways, and you're one amongst a bunch. But I have read for a couple contests and have had my scripts read for different contests, and I've always thought about that because not all contest readers are created equal. There's been great feedback I've got. There's been feedback I went, did this person even know what a comedy is? I don't know what but they're not all the same. And yeah, I always kind of tell people have more than one person read, even if you're Spielberg. I have a thing that I think my tastes are my tastes, and you need to have more than one person read it and get some more feedback than just one reader. I think that's really important as a writer, to not just take any readers as the word of God. I mean, we're just trying to make the best judgment we can for whoever we're working for, or whoever we're doing the contest for, or whatever. So,
Jim?
Yeah, I had a question for Diane. Do you mean that the WGA delivered you printed out a hardcover? That's awesome. I would love to.
I
be
mean,
able
it's
to
great.
just-
I got a stack here. I keep all my favorites. There's like a stack here in my office. They're just
That's
the
wild.
best scripts I've ever
That's
read.
wild.
So, yeah.
So you have a literal slush pile that you work through.
I have my own slush pile. It's a great slush pile. It's just beautiful slush pile.
That's awesome. Well, with my experience, obviously they have dozens, if not hundreds, of readers in Austin for Austin, and for anyone who hasn't considered going to their screenwriters conference, I highly recommend it. It's pretty inspiring, and there's a lot to learn, and it's pretty amazing. But they actually have an interface for us, an online interface, so you read it, and their rules are you have to read the whole thing, whether you like it or not. I've heard from other friends who have read for other contests that unofficially, officially, it's like, listen, if it's you're at page 30 or page 50, and there's no way that they're going to redeem it, just stop. But with Austin, because we have to actually write the entire, like we have to do a write-up of what the story is from beginning to end, briefly, you have to read the whole thing, which is going to lead to, I think, some of your other questions that you might about, like what makes us, stop or upset or whatever when we're reading. Because if you can imagine, I mean, it's one thing if I get a script and I read 5 pages and I go, yeah, I can't do this. I just can't do this. I mean, that's one thing. But if I'm being forced to read the whole thing, and from page 1, I can tell, I won't get ahead of myself, but if I can tell that it's not going to go anywhere, then it gets infuriating fast. But getting back to what I was saying, sorry, at Austin, they have an interface. So you write in all of your stuff and you mark whether, is it going to go on to the second round, which is the quarterfinals? Is it do I recommend it for a semifinalist or even a finalist? And they have some sort of math that goes on. And then it goes to another reader. And that other reader, if it's a no, if I say no, it's not going to go on to the second round quarterfinalist, that other reader has to read at least 10 pages. And if within 10 pages they say, I agree, this is not the quality for at least a quarterfinalist, they can agree. And there is lore of Austin, which is one time one person said not ready for quarterfinals. The next reader read the first 10 pages, went, I kind of want to see where this goes. They recommended it for quarterfinals. It worked its way up and it won. So it's possible. In the 2 years that I had groups of 60 scripts to read, that didn't happen once. I mean, every single no was like, that I had to read, because I have to read 60 full scripts and then something like 50 no's. So I have to read 10 pages of other scripts, and they clearly were not, they weren't ready.
I think there's a temptation for us to jump ahead into the horror stories of scripts, and I'm trying really hard to resist that, because I think it's gonna be super compelling, and I think it's gonna be a great note to kind of wind up on. But B, I kind of don't want to blow our wads so quickly.
I hear you.
I'm kind of pace ourselves a little bit, but I just want to
just
tell me the
breathe-
horror
I'll
stories,
breathe
tell me the
deep.
worst stuff. I'm gonna breathe. There are some questions popping up in the comments, and I know we're going to wait until the very end to kind of do the general Q&A, but some of them are pertaining to the things that we've been talking about. So I want to try to kind of slip them in as we're going. And one of the questions comes from Serena, which is for Tom. So when you're seeing a script that maybe doesn't have the right story for the studio, let's say, but there are signs that the writer might be a good fit for the studio. You hinted before that it might just be about, okay, well, we have this person who wants specifically, we're looking for someone who writes good action scenes or someone who writes good dialogue. Do you know that stuff kind of ahead of time? Like, oh, well, we're definitely looking for a good dialogue script fixer. So let's just, plow through these and look for someone who's good with words. Or is it just kind of more serendipitous than that?
No, it's not really serendipitous, because one of the things I had to do was great. What was the dialogue like? What was the action like? And so I saw that question as well. And so, for instance, with action, when I'm reading for action, I'm looking for things that are punchy. So it's going to be short action paragraphs. It's going to be 1, 2, maybe at the most 3 sentences. And it's 3 sentences, it's 2 lines. It's things that make you see the action happening. When I would see good dialogue, it would be dialogue that you could just hear. You could hear the way that it was being spoken. And of course, a big part of that is because by that time, you know who the character is. And that could happen in the first page. You may know right off the bat that the way this dialogue is spoken and that's not saying that, you're writing y'all and, dropping the G's off things, but just the tone of the writing will indicate to you that you know who this person is. The selection of words is really good. It's accurate, and you just want to know more. You want to, very much know more about what's going on and who it is and what they're all about. I know that, right now we're focusing on the first 10 pages, and there's a lot you can tell in 10 pages. And it's, yeah. I think probably the first 25 or 30 scripts that I read in probably the first 3 or 4 weeks at the absolute most. I was given that permission that if it was, if I hit 10 pages and it just wasn't worth it, I could throw it out. I didn't do that with any of them. By the time I was doing the long treatment style stuff, I had some, if I could have thrown it out at 10 pages, I absolutely would have, but I didn't have that option at that point. And yes, that did become much more painful, because within the first 10 pages, you knew this just wasn't going to work. And again, it was because the person they just didn't have the ability to make those words work together.
Diane, I'd love to get your perspective on that, because I think you've got this really interesting dual experience where you've been a contest judge, and you've probably either been in situations where you feel like you could safely say after 10 pages, this isn't a good script, or this isn't going to work, or you've wanted to at least do that. But then within the classroom setting, obviously you don't really have that option, I would imagine. So can you talk about the different kind of mindsets you bring to those different experiences? Oh, Diane, you're muted.
I knew I'd do that. So yeah, I knew it. So anyway, so for students, it's a whole different thing. When you're reading for students, they should have the freedom to just stink. I mean, just full on throw it out there. It should just be, horrific. But you can tell already, even when someone's just throwing anything on a page, if those are compelling characters I want to learn more about. I mean, I've read first pages of first drafts of scripts I still think about. I mean, the story's there and I want to know, and it needs honing and everything. But I would say with let's back up. I was thinking about this guy, New Year Asses. So the first 10 pages for like the WGA or something, I'm going to read that whole script, and it's already, they've already said it's good and it's already probably been produced. And I will give it the first, because now you have series, not just a feature. So I'll give it the first pilot, because you have to set up so much stuff in a pilot. I'll give it the pilot and then one more before I will go, oh my God, I'm not going to read all 500 pages. I will give it that much. But for students and stuff, I think it's way different, because they are still navigating the story. They're still finding their way. They're still, that's a whole different thing than if I'm reading for somebody who says, oh, can you look at this? I'm going to send it on to a producer. What do you think? That's way more honed. And you're going to be a lot more critical, and you're going to be a lot more like, those 10 pages matter. And by page 3, and I would say, I'll even go a step farther than Tom. by page 3, if I'm not engaged and don't care, or I haven't even smiled and it's supposed to be a comedy, or I can't tell the tone, or I can't tell who the main character is, or I can't get a real beat on at least one element of the script in 3 pages, I really wonder if you're a really good screenwriter. It's almost that soon. 10 pages is quite a bit, actually. So I think you can really get a beat, especially for some of you guys who have read like that many scripts for a contest. I mean, you start to see already really quickly who has control of the story and who doesn't. I guess I'll say that.
That's awesome information. And I see Randy in the chat has kind of been sniffing around at this question too. So I'm going to pivot from what you said, Diane, and throw it over to Jim, which is, Diane saying within the 3 pages, it's pretty clear whether something is humming or not. And I think we all had that experience where we've read something and it feels like it works, or we've read something and it does not feel like it works. Jim, what is it about those first 10 pages that you're looking for? Like, what are those kind of intangibles that we want to try to make tangible, that we could say, this is what really makes the difference between getting tossed away or moving on to the next round of a contest?
Well, I think it's a mix between form and function in kind of a way. So I want to be taken care of. I want to look at the first page, second page, third page, and go, this storyteller is taking good care of me and taking me along for a ride. I don't have to do any work. I don't have to figure out what they mean. I'm just sitting back and I'm enjoying this. Like when I open up a screenplay, I want to love this. I obviously don't want to hate it. It's just like, please entertain me. And I think if it's well written within the first 3 or 10 pages, you can figure out if the story is going to work. But a lot of times with contests, and I'm sure with students appropriately so, that first page, you can tell if they know how to write. Honestly, it's in the first half a page.
So I'm going to press you a little bit on that. So
yeah, go.
It almost sounds like there's a distinction between something being well written versus something having a compelling story.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
How do you break?
Go ahead.
Have you seen scripts that are not well written, but the story is just a barnstormer and you want to keep reading it, or vice versa?
No, if it's a really good story, it's well written, but it could get muddled in parts where you're like, you didn't need that scene. It didn't really influence anything. I don't think that, of course, someone might have a great concept where they're like time traveling cats, and you're sitting here going, I want to know about time traveling cats. And you're like, this is terrible, but I love time traveling cats, So there is that of a possibility. But what I meant about the form, and that's a format thing that we might talk about later too. But if I look at a first page and there's a couple of blocks of 5 lines of action and everything is packed, and it's immediately starting with 2 people sitting across each other, having a conversation about what they did yesterday, it's like, oh my God. So it might get good, probably won't, because if they know how to get it good, they would have known how to craft something. And if I could just tell you this one quick thing. One of my favorite things, I can't remember what it was, scripts that I read a while ago, they actually set it up for the first half of a page of a terrible script, correctly formatted, but where it was just like, oh, here we go again. It's another one of those. And then the second half twisted it so fast, so expertly, that it was like, I laughed for a full minute and then I read the first page again.
Oh,
That's
wow.
how, like, they had a meta control over the craft, right? So they knew what I was not wanting to see and then made a joke about it. And so anyway, everybody doesn't have to do that, but
Great move.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Tom, let's get you in on this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I can think of a particular script, much like Diane, there's a script that it's been sitting in the back of my mind at this point for getting close to 10 years. And it was a fantastic script. In prepping for this, I went back and I looked at it, and I honestly thought, this has never been produced. I looked up the writer, and honestly, I'm tempted to contact the writer myself and say, I know this didn't go anywhere with this group, but you need to keep pushing for it, because it was a great story, and it was full of action, and it was a comedy, and it was about women in their 40s. And so it was handed off to me to read because of action. But it was a brilliant screenplay. It just wasn't as polished as they could have wanted it to be. And I could tell behind all of it that they had the ability to make it into something really, really good. And it's, again, it's one of those, I think about that and I just really want to follow up on it. And the opposite, I had a screenplay that was given to me. This is one of our friends. He's a director. He's going, and this was key, and I should have seen it there. He's going to be well known. To this day, he still isn't. And I could tell by his writing that he had vision of what he wanted to present, but the writing and the story just weren't there. He had vision of scenes, but the scenes didn't tie together in any way, shape, or form to create a story. And that was unfortunate, because I really felt like this is one I don't want to have to say pass on both the writer and the story, because it's just not good. And I know this is your friend.
That's an awkward conversation for sure. Diane, what's your perspective on those kind of magical first 10 pages in terms of things that I think we tend to think of, like formatting and technical accuracy versus story
I
chops?
actually feel that same, well, on a student perspective or just a brand new writer, you can tell in the first 10 pages, even if it's not polished, kind of what these guys are saying. They know their stuff, that if you give them feedback, they know how to handle it. They're holding you and they're taking you through a story. It might need some help, but you can tell if they've got the chops to, if you gave them a comment, they would know what to do with it, or take it or leave it or adapt it or whatever. You want those first 10 pages at the very least, you want to sense that they really understand the story and they understand what they're saying and they know how to write. And I always think, as Stephen King always said, you need to take the audience by the hand and walk them through the story. And I think about that even when I'm writing. You want someone to feel like they took you by the hand, they're walking. I might say, oh, can we just go through another door? I don't like this door at all. But that if you could give, I think anybody who's even working with you on a script wants to know that you're in control enough and understand just the whole storytelling and the characters and everything, that when you're being cared for, like you were saying, that then that they can make changes, make adaptations, anything. I mean, you just know they can do their stuff. And so that 10 pages is more than just story. It can actually tell you whether that's somebody you can work with. If it's, and my one pet peeve, every year I probably get to read 4 scripts about a screenwriter who's writing about blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, get more creative than that. Oh, for the love of God. But that's my own pet peeve. But you can tell if in those first 10 pages, not even about the story and the character, but if they can actually work within the whole screenwriting thing. I mean, they can do it. So that's.
I'm kind of now I'm kind of curious about.
I'm all over the place, but hopefully that made sense.
No, it's great. It's great info. Now I kind of want to ask Jim and Tom about their pet peeves, because it's interesting, because people sometimes think of writers or as readers as this kind of just monolithic body of consumption where they pull in stories and they give their reactions to it. But as individual people, everyone has pet peeves. Jim or Tom, are there any things that just crop up in a story where you're just slapping your head, and it's not necessarily something that everyone would slap their head about, but it's just one of those things you just can't get past?
I'm happy to go, which may sound really ominous. I read a script that was just full of the misuse of so many different verbs and nouns that it drove me nuts. And it was supposedly Well, and not supposedly, because I know the writer, because it was somebody that I was doing this as a favor for. It's just like, how do you not know what envious means? That's something you can look up. It was and it wasn't deliberate. That was the worst part. It just, I can get past misspellings without any problem, particularly if it's a good story. I'll breeze past misspellings because I don't care. I want the story. But this was so distracting that it made it difficult to read the script. And I'd say that more than anything else is what really, really bothers me. I can suspend belief without any problem. I can, it's no problem to do those things, but to just constantly be reading words that somebody who's a writer supposedly should know. And envious was, I can't even think of how he used it because it was so off. That's how bad it was. And at that point, that's where I really wanted to just say, I can't read anymore. And that was probably not more than page 30.
Gotcha. This sandwich is so envious. Oh man.
It was actually, yes, it was like that. And he wasn't even talking to anybody.
How about you, Jim?
I have a few. There was this great story I heard where a screenwriter in the old days handed off his screenplay to a producer, and the producer grabbed it, weighed it in his hand, says, "How many pages is this?" And he said, 100 pages. He said, "It's my favorite script." And it's kind of true when you have a stack, as Diane, I'm sure Tom will tell you, when you look at, like, the first thing we do when we open it up is we'll just take a look at the top of the PDF or look at the back and just say, how many pages is this, so we can just pace ourselves. And if it's 120 nowadays, or God forbid 130 or 140, I hate you. And it's not that it's because, I might start reading it and love it and go, I wish this went on forever, but that's usually not the case. And it's arbitrary. There's a big argument about page length and if it actually represents 1 minute and blah, 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 blah. Maybe they should be 200 pages, whatever. But as a reader, and I've got, 50 more to go, I just want to get through these as much as I can. And at the same time, I've read 110-page screenplays that took me an hour and a half to read, and I loved it, and 110-page screenplays that took 3 hours to read. And it's the same number of pages, but it's the formatting, it's the lack of white space, letting my brain imagine what I'm seeing, and ease of read. Like I said, the multiple lines of action, unfilmables, where someone leans against the car and thinks about the time that they went to the park with their uncle. And it's like, where is that a flash? What is that a voiceover? What do you mean he thought that? We're not, this isn't a novel. And yeah. People trying to be sneaky, and it's 120 pages, and then they compress the line length with that little software trick, and I can see it. Tom and Diane, I'm sure, can see it like that. You look at it and you're like, oh my, how am I going to read this? Because it's so close, and it just takes longer to read than if you had just left it at 120. My own, I'm a screenwriter, and I would imagine a lot of other readers are screenwriters also. So when I see orphan after orphan after orphan, meaning it's a bunch of action or dialogue and one word at the end over and over again, I'm thinking, my screenwriter side is saying, if you cleaned all of these up, you would have saved yourself 2 or 3 pages of line length, right?
I have to comment on one of my peeves also is the smash cut, wild cut, this cut. All these different cuts, smash cut, this cut, that cut. I don't know. I kind of go, it should flow. I should be able to see it. If you have to put all these smash cuts in here and you're trying to direct it or whatever, I actually get distracted. It's actually hard to actually read because I'm seeing all this direction and all this, and it's super distracting. I find they've wasted so much real estate because that's a line before, smash cut, a line after. That's 3 lines you could have used for real action. And
or more white space.
yes,
Just
way
more just cleaning it up. I mean, if when I look at a page and it's just mostly white with like 1 line, 2 lines of dialogue, 1 line of description, 2 lines of dialogue, it's like, oh, this is wonderful. It doesn't even matter what's in it. It's just sort of like my brain has time to imagine what I'm seeing and hearing on screen.
Yeah.
And I just have two more little ones. I mean, superficial descriptions of characters. She's hot but doesn't know it. It's like, write something as a description that is either it's just super simple or something unique that no one has ever written in a script before. That it's like 1 line and I know who that person is based on that 1 line. And I had one more. Oh, this is really and then people talking heavy-handedly. Hey mom, you've been my mom for 27 years. It's just like, have them just talk naturally. They know, we'll figure out that they're, mother, son. We'll figure it out. We'll get there. It doesn't have to. Anyway, those are mine. And all of these that I just listed, I've seen on the first page.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just sort of like, and I got 130 pages to go.
Well, I feel like Jim, it feels very strongly about this issue, but I'm gonna circle back to Tom and Diane real quick. And I think Jim's kind of answered this already, but if he jumps back in, more power to him. But if you had the Thanos's glove and you could snap your fingers and erase one screenwriting bad habit from every single contest entry or submission that you've ever seen, what would be the one thing that you would instantly fix for every writer?
exposition instead of making it visual. Just characters just talking and telling you stuff versus letting me see it and experience it. That just seems like and that's a new writers. I think you evolved out of that. But for first-time screenwriters who are trying to get in the door, I would just try to find every bit of exposition and get it the heck out of there if you can. That would be my one.
All right, Tom?
I would agree, but I would also add on to that the directing on the page with smash cuts and cut twos and not even flashbacks. Some flashbacks can work, but just I think the things that all of us do when we're new screenwriters, and I think it's based out of the fact that we see something in a film and we like it, and so we want to replicate it, but we don't yet know how to replicate it. And probably the biggest reason for it is because we've never actually read it. And I read a lot of scripts just as a reader, but I also really actually enjoy just reading scripts. I have a massive script library myself that's all PDFs, and the biggest thing I can tell you is go out there and read scripts. Read good scripts, and then the more good scripts you read, the more often you'll find a bad script, and then it gets to a point where as you're reading bad scripts, you know what you don't want to do, and it becomes it's not so much that you consciously are thinking I don't want to do this, but you know that as soon as you put it on the page, you have to go back and change it because it just doesn't look and feel right.
I'd actually even say if you're brand new and you want to get some experience, just as soon as you see something's not a good script, put it outside. Just read great script after great script. Just absorb brilliance. I just remember reading The Sting when I was younger, and I would read it. Every time I read it, I thought I got better. When I need to be inspired, I'd read it. You'll find these scripts that just make you better, that inspire you, and they're just so full of information that you should, as a new writer, you should just bathe in them. Just bathe in the good stuff, and don't focus on the crap. Just I have a lot of students who say, I read that and I wouldn't do that, because I was like, well, don't read that. That's stupid. That's stupid. Read good, solid stuff and try to be those scripts. And
start with the WGA 101 greatest scripts. Every one of them except for Philadelphia Story is available. And if you are part of a university interlibrary lending system, you can actually get Philadelphia Story. But that is the single greatest volume of scripts you can read, judged by people who read and write scripts to say these are the best that are out there.
The one caveat to all of that, and I agree with all of that, is that if the script is older than 20 years, don't copy their format.
Oh, yeah, totally agree. Totally.
I mean, don't learn format from that. Learn storycraft because they're perfect. Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. That.
Yeah, that's an important.
The one magic thing that I would want, and this you could talk for hundreds of hours on this, is to get your characters to want something, all of your characters in the script to want something, and have them act on it in the way that their character only they would act on it. And go ahead, please.
Oh, on that, and they have a flaw. These characters that walk through and they're just perfect. They have no flaws. They want something, but they're just this. No, we're all flawed, and that is part of your script, is overcoming your flaws or your stories. That's one of the things that your character is going to stand in their way, is their own self. And I think new writers often just forget that their characters are bulletproof and amazing, and but yeah.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that.
We're all guilty of all of these things.
Yeah.
We will do all of these things wrong. But when you're the reader and you're like, here we go again,
Yes, exactly.
That actually prompts an interesting question for me. So what, have you ever been reading a script and recognized something in someone else's script that you yourself do? I would assume as a bad habit, where you're like, oh, that's terrible. Oh, I totally do that. And have you had that moment of kind of self-reflection as part of the process of being a reader?
Never.
I think your nose is growing.
The list is too long.
Yeah.
I think, every time, and I think that's one of the reasons why I don't, particularly now that I'm reading a lot for students, and the reading that I do for students is completely voluntary. I let students know that I've been a reader in the past. I'm happy to read their work now. Initially, the screenwriting instructor said, "Oh my God, you're writing coverage." It's like, no, you need to read what I'm writing. I think because I know I made all those mistakes, I don't want to beat somebody up over doing something like that unless they happen to be at a point where they definitely know better. And I've read a couple of those where it's like, it's obvious you got to this part and you slapped it together. And so it's a different situation in that case. But, I think it's particularly now my job is to be more of a coach. And to say, this is, have you thought about it this way? Have you considered making this adjustment? Change things like this. Think about how you actually want to view it. Something that's different about the students that I'm reading for is that every one of them is in a filmmaking program. So they are at the same time learning how to be actors or directors or producers or distributors. And so they're all coming at it from a different direction. And yet at the same time, they're all still having to write scripts. And so, if I'm working with somebody who's a director, they might be writing in a much more directorial style of writing. And I have to keep that in mind, that, they're not going to step out of the door with their bachelor's degree and suddenly become a world famous director, but they're going to have to start someplace. And so if they can recognize that in themselves, even if they decide to step out and try to become a PA in cinematography, they still are going to have to recognize a good script. Mm-hmm. And so I think the best way to recognize a good script is to continually be improving and improving yourself. And, I do the same thing. I will sometimes finish a script and say, I'm done, and want to just be done with it. And, you've got to go back and you've got to continually make improvements. And even when I think that, I've done the best I can, I'll go back a few days later or a couple of years later and realize, oh my gosh, I should have changed this. I should have done this differently. I can present this in a better, more realistic way. And I see the same thing with scripts that you might read, from one year to the next, and how they've improved dramatically. because I have students who are freshmen. We had a freshman this year who actually won Scriptapalooza with one of his scripts. It was fantastic. And he resubmitted it for his entry into the bachelor's program. He's made changes. He had a winning script and he made changes that were better. So, you know, I think that's what I want to be doing with my own stuff. And it's what I would really be looking for is, can somebody, particularly if I'm recommending a writer, can this person make those changes? Can they recognize that in themselves? Can they take the criticism to be able to make those changes? Because that's equally important. And also, can they take the criticism and know that the criticism may not be valid? And you know, you hear stories of, well, they recommended I change this, and you know, I changed the color of the shirt from black to white, and they loved it. You know, or they didn't make any changes at all, and they loved it. So,
I'm going to pivot a little bit because we've got some good questions coming in from the chat. So we know Diane's "The Sting" is kind of her Rocky anthem of a movie, if you will. Jim and Tom, what are your?
The script is good.
No, no. Oh, of the script. But Jim and Tom, what are your go-to scripts? Your favorite script?
for as old as it is, I absolutely love reading and rereading Casablanca. It's the story there. It really is. And as I look at others, American Beauty is one that I really enjoy reading. The King's Speech, I thought was a fantastically well-written script. And I think part of that also is the speech that was given with it when he accepted the Oscar. And that's the, he when he was 9, he figured out he enjoyed lying, and writing scripts was the best way to do it. And it just kind of always stuck with me because, it's not that I enjoy lying, but it's a way to tell stories. And, Slumdog Millionaire, I'm looking at that. That's another one that's on my kind of short list of scripts that I have on a shelf here that I've bothered to print out. So, yeah.
Jim, how about you?
I love Galaxy Quest. It's so easy to read, and once you watch the movie and you read the script, you're like, they just shot the script. I mean, it's near perfect. And Juno, actually, I love Juno, just the ease. I believe it was infuriatingly, it was her first screenplay. And
I don't believe
no. Well, she had a blog before
I
that.
know.
And,
I know.
Yeah. And then you read it, and it's just so fresh and fun to read. And it was a long time ago when I read it, but it's still. I mean, there's so many great scripts out there.
There are so many.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna toss a plug for Unforgiven Ed. That's my favorite. I love reading that script.
I've read that.
Oh, so it's another one of those scripts where it's just atom for atom. It's just the script is translated to the screen.
Wow.
I have to throw in this because I've just always been amazed. For reading for the WGA, I read this series for Klondike, which, it's your average series. But there was one scene where the guys are climbing this mountain, and the scene was so perfect and so devastating and just caught your heart that I would have sold that script. I mean, if I was a reader, I would have told people you have to make it based on this scene. It was just arresting. And it was so good that they couldn't really recreate it on the screen. It was one of those things where it was actually even better in the script. And I thought, I kind of will always remember that's kind of what I'm shooting for, that someone is just going to see it so vividly that you hope the director can do it. I mean, you want to just fly with this thing. So, but Klondike was one of these ones where, I'll get back to my point is, I think there's some scripts where I will say there were scenes I thought were just magic. Maybe not the entire script, but there were scenes I would just magic. Yeah.
And the flip side is when there's a great, one of my favorite movies is Scott Pilgrim versus the World, because it's so unique and vivid, and I'm dying to find out how they wrote that. Because Edgar Wright is so specific with everything he does, where did it come from? And they only have an early version of the script, which is not the movie at all.
Yes,
And so, that's another one of those just sort of like, I wish I knew what the magic was in that script.
yeah.
That's great. All right, I'm going to dig into some of these other questions that we're getting. Randy is curious. I think, was it Randy? Randy, was it you? No, it was Martin. Sorry, my bad. Martin, so I had a couple questions about the kind of logistics of timing when it comes to entering a script, both around, is it better to enter a script as an early bird or right before the deadline? And then assuming on the other side of the pipeline, you've got a reader who has this, conveyor belt of chocolate, like from I Love Lucy, coming at them, and it's filled with scripts. Do readers look for reasons to say no to a script when the pressure's on?
I actually have some conspiratorial ideas about all of this. I'll just quickly share them, which is that you never, if you submit early or you submit late, you never know where in the reader you're getting, where their list of scripts are. So if you get their 60th script that they're supposed to read and they are burnt out and they're like, give me a reason to stop reading, then that's tough. I have a quick story of a friend, Mike. I won't say the whole name because, but he put in, he submitted normally to the Austin Film Festival, didn't even make it to second round. The next year, he got an email from Austin saying, hey, we've opened up the contest. And he's like, well, I guess I'll just send this in, and sent it that day. And he was a finalist. And now, is there a correlation? I feel like that the earlier you send it, the better chance you have that whoever's going to get it is not going to be that far along. And they're certainly not going to be burnt out 2 weeks before they have to read all of their stuff 4 months later. You'll probably be, I believe it's first come, first served. It has to be, because if they don't have it yet, and I also have a feeling that I won't talk about Austin necessarily, but at a certain point when you send it in last minute, it might not ever get read because they just can't get to it. And they won't officially say that, but it could be the case.
Diane?
I'm totally with the as I want to love every script, but I will say after I've read 3 scripts I don't like, I'm just almost beat up by the 4th script. I just feel sort of pummeled, and you'd hate to be the person who has the great 4th script and I'm coming in, battle worn, or not even 4th, whatever number, and I kind of go, yeah, the earlier the better. Totally, I'm 100% there. Yeah, but you can't really control that. Really, but if you can try for it, I'd go for it.
So it sounds like the early bird deadline is your friend. All right.
A lot more
And actually,
okay.
I was going to say something that's similar to that is, when I was reading 3 scripts a week and providing coverage, by the time I hit the 3rd script, I was burned out too. So I would tend to lean toward the earlier you get it in, the better off you are. Not to mention the fact that most times the earlier you get it in, the less you pay. So,
I have a friend who turns it in like something for, what's the other one? Not Austin, but the Nichols. He will send it in 3 times because he goes, you never know if you got that person who just had a bad day at work and blah, blah, blah. He just wants to have 3 and he pays the price and everything and sends it in 3 times. And they all get different places. The same script makes it.
That is brilliant.
He sends them in, and some do great, and it's the same script. It's if you're going to spend $50, you might as well spend $150, I guess.
Especially for the nickel, for sure.
For nickels, you might as well do it. So if you trust that's the script and you have good faith in it, but he's done it, and I have to give him points. He's done better doing it that way. So
that's very interesting. All right, well, dig deep, people. Your kids don't need to go to college. It's overrated. Don't worry about it. Some other questions. Brett was asking, do any of the three of you have kind of a personal philosophy as a reader that maybe you don't think other readers would share?
Like what? Like
I don't know. Brett asked the question. Brett, do you want to? He might not be hearing me, but Oh, go ahead, Brett. Do you want to jump in and
Yeah,
elaborate
is
a little?
there like a certain, rule of thumb that you personally have when you read, or some sort of belief that when you see it, you're like, no, I'm done, or you really like something where someone else doesn't agree on it, like a caveat of screenwriting?
Actually, I'll say that I don't mind typos. It can't be riddled with typos, right? If I'm so distracted with the best story I've ever read, and I see a typo, it doesn't even process. In fact, the script that I was talking about that my friend Mike sent in and was a finalist at Austin, when I read it was full of typos. I mean, there was like half a sentence that actually was cut off. It like didn't finish, and it was a finalist. That's how good it was.
An example, basically, I was talking to a producer today. It's when and where to put in dates as titles in your script. He was like, it's maybe more distracting. I was like, well, maybe if it's like just the month or the year, basically if it's a historical drama or something. So we were kind of going back and forth about when it was and was not appropriate. He was under the impression like you should just remove them all entirely.
I'm there, but I figure it should be visually. I should be able to see what year and kind of step. I mean, if you absolutely like, it's Christmas Day, but even then I should be able to tell a little bit. I mean, you should really work at eliminating. That would be mine. No, I would work. Here's the other thing. You're talking about changing scripts. I usually challenge students, and I think there's some here, but don't just go, I'm going to fix that line, or I'm going to fix that color of their shirt. I mean, write the scene 4 or 5 different ways and see if it changes it, what works, what doesn't. My pet peeve, not pet, kind of what you're talking about is if I have to read a script again, and have to is in this term correct, and all the changes is the color of the shirt, that second line he said, and I read this whole crap script for these 5 changes that this person feels like they rewrote it. That's really frustrating. And I don't know if other people share that, but if I've taken that kind of time out to read it again to give feedback and someone hasn't really done the work, it's bad.
Yeah, I want to address kind of both those things. One is that definitely if it's somebody who's there to help you, which an instructor is, if the instructor is saying, you need to change this, you really need to attempt to change it. If it's somebody who, if it's the creative director that says, this needs to be changed, that I believe you can actually take with a grain of salt. Getting back to the dates, I think you have to seriously look at why the dates are there. If the dates are part of your ticking time bomb, then they can be very, very important. But are there other ways you can put those dates in without having it be a super? Are there other ways that you can convey the passage of time over more than just a single day or two? Does the character's hair get longer? Do their clothes get rattier? Particularly with historical dramas, unless you're focused on something that is taking place over the period of maybe 2 or 3 days, you're going to face that, and dates can be distracting. And so unless you can tie the date to a particular event or a particular location, like, June 6th, 1944, the coast of Normandy, and then June 6th, 1944, the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Well, you have 2 things that are completely distinct there. And I don't honestly think that either one probably needs the date unless it is the very first thing that you're seeing. And then after that, think about it with like Private Ryan. You don't keep seeing dates in there, but that the passage of time has taken place. And yes, they introduced it as June 6th, but I think that that was more just the basic historical part of it, because once that happened, you knew what was going on.
I would add on the date thing too. It stops you. You don't want to stop the flow of the reader, that they have to stop and read a super and then go on your story. You want to keep this, once they're in the flow and they're reading, you want to keep them there and just keep them turning those pages as fast as they can. And so supers, things like that, that's a stop. and read it and then get back into your story. So I'd avoid those just for the flow of keeping your reader involved, if you can do it. If you can do it.
And along those lines, just real quick, slowing down a reader, every single time a reader has to go, wait, they said he, but we've got two guys in talking to each other, which he, and we might be talking about half a second, or you might go, oh, the reader will figure it out. It's in context. Don't let us figure it out. Make it grammatically so clear that anyone reading it, even if they just started reading in that sentence, they know what's going on. Don't let us have to process anything. I think there's an art to it for sure, or a craft to it. But it's incredibly important because we get exhausted from having to stop and go, wait, was that the dog from the first act or the second act? It's a dog, you know, I mean, just us doing that over and over again, it's death.
It's like trying to learn the parts of the cell over. And if they were all different cells and all had different parts, yeah, it can be really exhausting. The thing that really bothers me is when I have to try to keep characters separate because they all have names that are just too similar. You know, I'm reading the draft of a novel for a friend right now, and it's set during the early Roman era, and it's a bunch of names that it took me a long time to catch on to which name belonged to who. And I pointed that out as being something that was kind of frustrating. And fortunately, he took it as, oh yeah, you're right. I need to make sure that, you know, you understand this person is the kid, this person is the old guy. And it made a huge difference once he picked up on that. And it's the exact same thing when reading the script. If you've got, you know, Nancy and Neville and, you know, Nussbaum, and it just goes on and on, you get to a point where you're just confusing everybody and it doesn't make any sense anymore.
And worse is when you name every single human that walks across the screen. A kid walks up, asks for an ice cream, and it's Jeff, and Jeff walks away, and we never see Jeff again. Yeah. But in our database is, you know, our reader database is going, okay, Jeff, I'm going to have to remember Jeff. And then you know, 30 characters that we'll never see again later. It's just like, I can't even remember the main characters' names because you're inundating us with first and last names of people who we just see for, you know, one or two lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
let's.
When Jeff walks into when Jeff walks in and gets that ice cream cone on page 5, and you don't see him again for another 30 pages, you better make sure that on page 5 you really know that Jeff is going to be important.
Like in the Untouchables, when that little girl comes in with her basket of eggs, she's going to blow up. That's important. You can give her a name. I mean, I don't think she does. I think she's just a little girl and she blows up. But I was like, she's in there for a reason. I was going to say that on that note, putting people in that are extraneous and don't have any purpose, that's also just as bad as not naming. I mean, because anybody who walks in, I think they must be here for a real reason that furthers the story or the character or something. And if you just filled up a room with people doing, I'd be really, really careful about how many people you populate things with, if that makes sense, unless they're important to the story.
And if I could say one tiny thing that's separate, but I just want to get in there. Never submit a script in the shooting draft format where you have the numbers along the side. For some reason, I think people have read so many of them. They're like, well, I want to seem professional too, so I'll turn on that format. That's not for you. That's for when you're actually making the film. And so like, I'll get confused. I'm like, oh, did they make this film? Is it supposed to be in a contest if they already made it? And it turns out they just didn't know what they were doing.
Agreed.
Alrighty. Well, I think people have earned the right to hear some horror stories. So, Diane, I'm going to start with you. Can you give me a real toe curler of a horror story of a script that you read for a contest? Probably not for a student, because that might be me.
Yes, well, some is kind of student. I've had kind of the kiss of death a little bit for me in any story. And it's always like, it's a horror for me because I get so uncomfortable. I don't know quite what to do with the information, is when someone says, this is a true story. This is exactly the dialogue. This is my mom. This is my dad or something. And I'm like, this scene stinks. And now what am I going to say? Your mom isn't believable. Your dad would never do that. They should split. I don't know what to do with that information. And so I always get very frustrated sometimes, or that's my own thing. And I'm very uncomfortable when people come in and say, this is, a true family story. And I'm like, oh, please, no, I don't know what to do with that information and still be a nice person, I guess, to you sometimes. I don't feel like I can be honest. So I've gotten some scripts like that people have actually stopped talking to me. I gave them some feedback and then they stopped talking to me and said, that was a true story. That was my mom. And you told me X, Y, and Z. And I was like, so that was my worst. I've had 2 or 3 people just will never talk to me again because I gave them some feedback on a story that was true. And that's one.
All right. So just because it's true doesn't mean it's interesting, people. Tom, how about you?
I alluded to it earlier, and that was the script that was written by this director, who was a friend of one of the executive producers. And they said friend, and when I looked the person up, I think it more than likely was actually a friend's son. But the script had all the hallmarks of something that I really would have wanted to read. It was historical. It was based on fact. It was a Western. It took place in an area that I was very familiar with. So it had everything about it. I should have loved the script, but it was terrible. It was just one of the worst written scripts I'd ever seen. There were lapses in formatting that were just inexcusable. You'd be reading action and all of a sudden you'd see what is clearly a line of dialogue and there was no character saying it, and it clearly wasn't part of action, but it was written as an action paragraph. And it just reminded me of somebody having said, I've got this brilliant idea and I wrote it in a weekend. And I mean, that's how it read. It was just horrible. And then the worst part of it for me was that I had to actually write it in such a way that I could say, but this part was good. It's like, well, the tree, you mentioned sequoias and he described it as a tall tree. I mean, I was just searching for anything good to say about it because it was that bad. And it was very frustrating as a reader. And I honestly, at that point, I was thinking, I'm glad I'm an intern, because if I was being paid to write this, I would probably lose my job, because they moved the script to the head of my pile. They said that we need this done. We need it done fast. We're sure it's great. And it wasn't. It was a nightmare for me. I don't know whether, what it ever came of. I know that the director is not the big director they thought he was going to be. So.
Can't work my mute button. All right, Jim, you're up. Give us your worst.
I've got 2 that are the epitome of like these 2 groups of scripts that I keep seeing over and over. One is families sitting around tables, scene after scene, talking about their family. And it's not necessarily based on it, but it's just sort of like they're all saying, hey, what's Uncle Earl up to nowadays? Oh, that Uncle Earl, what a cad. Where should we go out for dinner tomorrow night? Chinese food? Can't have too much Chinese food. Cut to Chinese food restaurant for 120 pages. And I've seen this script so many times where it's families just like making each other laugh, and you're like, your family thinks you're really funny, and it's just not a movie. It's just not funny. I mean, so I read that script, and I've read versions of that script. And then the other kind is action movie that the writer, who's never written anything before, imagines this is what makes an action movie an action movie. And my favorite was this one, and where he was a Mack truck driver, and he would bust into warehouses where his sister was tied up on a chair, and he'd be like, dude, don't shoot my sister. And the guy would be like, I'm going to shoot your sister, and then I'm going to shoot you. He's like, don't do it, because I'm going to shoot you first. And it was like that throughout the whole thing, except for when he got into his truck. And it was 1.5 pages to 2 pages of details of checking the air brakes and making sure the oil pressure was correct and all the things, all the detailed steps you have to do for a diesel truck. And if it wasn't bad, it would have been the funniest movie ever. I mean, it was just, but it was infuriating all at the same time. And I get a lot of those too, where it's just like you've only seen 1 page of what a script looks like, and now you're writing what an action film should be. Anyway,
I love the fact that he was breaking into warehouses, where it's like there's just like a
over
recurring
and
thing
over.
that
It was just like
happened to him,
constantly bars and
my
warehouses.
sister's
and
caught
it's just-
again. I busted to that next warehouse. I kind of want to watch this movie now.
It doesn't sound that bad, actually. It's like, oh my-
Maybe I'm better at pitching than he is.
I mean, it's basically Big Trouble in Little China, but no.
Feels
great
like
movie, by
Hot
the way.
Fuzz
No.
effect. So.
Question from Laura. What role does the writer's voice play when you're evaluating a script? And by voice, I mean they're kind of unique writing style, character, flavor.
I think that's what makes the story. It's it's not subtext, but it is subtext at the same time. That's the flavor of the story. It's the tone of the story, and it's how the writer envisions everything, and that's what comes across in how they're writing the description. I think that's where you really see that is, it becomes important, because otherwise it's like reading a piece of technical writing. And I don't want to read technical writing for a script. I want to read a story that is causing me to see the story as I'm reading it. And when you read a story like that, it's mesmerizing. You don't put it down. You don't say, oh, I've got to take a break and go do something. It's wonderful.
That voice thing it doesn't even have to be like long descriptions. It's just the nouns you picked, or the verb you picked, or the tiny nuance of that scene that you want the camera to go to that would tell what everyone's thinking. I mean, it's like if all 3 of us were going to write the same scene about something, it would all come out very different, because we just would look at it very different. And so the voice is really almost, it's not so much like in prose where how you describe stuff. It's literally just the tangible pieces of a story you bring to the page. Those are your choices. Your choices are it. That is screenwriting. So
Absolutely. And if the mechanics of the story or the formatting or a bunch of other stuff is just noisy, it's hard to hear the voice. I mean, it's just like if you were in a room reading your story and there was traffic going on and someone cooking on the side, and it's just kind of it's very distracting. So that, there's layers of craft that have to happen so that your story your voice can be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Another question from Brett around kind of rules of thumb around, not to get too save the cat-ish on this, but like, by page 10, this should have happened. And by page 12, this should have happened. And by page 25, this should have happened. Are you ever reading with those types of guidelines in mind?
I'll say this, no. I kind of go, if that, I want to know, and this has to do with voice too. You can tell by page 5 or 10 or whatever right off the bat, if the writer has something to say. They are ready to tell you a story, and they have something they are going to take you on a journey. I'm in for it. I'm not going to sit there and go, page 15, he didn't hit the first act. Oh, hell with that. I mean, take me on a journey. I want to go. I'm not looking for that ever, almost when I'm reading the story. I might notice that you ended on page 50 and it should be longer, but
Well, I realize it after, as I'm reading, and I'm like, what's going on? Oh, okay. All right. So this just happened. So I'm feeling like this is the second act break, blah, 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 blah. I'm just subconsciously thinking that. And I'm like, God, it took a long time to get there. And I'll look and we're on page 40. And I'm like, we could have cut 10 or 15 pages off of this. I realize it afterward. I'm not going, oh, no, you don't. It's never like that.
Yeah, because it's they're not hard and fast rules. They're the guidelines. It's kind of like when you're building a house, every room does not have to be 10 by 11. Some rooms are going to be 10 by 14. Some are going to be 11 by 12. And I think it's the same thing when you're talking about where certain events happen. So, the 25-page break of Act 1 to Act 2 is good for a script that's 100 pages long. That doesn't work if it's 120 pages. So it's, those are guidelines. And I find that if I'm reading a good script, that if I go back and I look at those things, yeah, they happen pretty close. It may not be page 25, it might be page 23. The all is lost moment may not be on page 70, it might be page 80, but it works. And that's the important part is, did the story actually work?
And did the writer know what they want to achieve in each scene? When people are just filling with filler, like I think you're going into the warehouse and I'm going to shoot your sister. I mean, there's like filler, and then there's a purpose to this scene. And then I don't care if it's in Act 1 or 2, as long as this is the setup and this is part of the,
Yeah.
You understand, the writer understands what they're doing with this scene, whether it's set up or,
Well, it's kind of like the first page that Jim described where, it was just horrible. And then you got to the third page and realized that it was all a setup for you. I mean, that's somebody who knows the craft.
I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. I've got a few different questions that have come in, and we're probably going to be wrapping things up here in a few minutes. So if anyone else has any more questions, definitely get them in quick. But this is like a hybrid mutant question between Martin and Randy and let's see, Aviva. Are there things that you'll encounter in a script that are either like so amateurish or like the sign of someone who doesn't know what they're doing? Kind of like we were talking about before, but one of the things that I've heard a lot, and Aviva brought it up, so that's why I want to mention it, was you should never mention specific songs in a script. Like if you have a song in mind that you think is perfect for a scene, too bad, like don't say that. Or there's times when, you've heard, oh, well, because Saving Private Ryan came out last year, everyone's doing World War II scripts. So don't do World War II scripts. Are there things like that either come up that are kind of perennially things to avoid, or things that come up periodically? They're like, oh, well, everyone's doing earthquake scripts, so let's not read any more of those.
Two things. One is, I think the whole issue about songs is much different today when a lot of those things were first written. For one thing, if Sony decides to pick up your script, Sony owns, pretty much about half the music in the world. And so it used to be that getting your song approved was a huge, huge rights issue. And I don't think that's as much anymore. But I would be careful about how you do that, because if you are suggesting a specific song for a very specific reason, it needs to be part of your script, even if it seems like you'll never get it. But on the other hand, if you're just throwing out suggestions for music just for fun, I'd leave it out, absolutely leave it out, because then it just becomes another distracting thing. For me, when it comes to things like battle sequences, or particularly sequences with spies and spying, part of my background is that I was a special agent. I have run agents overseas. Nothing infuriates me more than to read something that is supposedly factual that I know, absolutely know, there's no way it's true. If you're going to write things like that, at least do your research. And I'll tell you, spying is an incredibly boring business. It is not the excitement that James Bond has. And the reason James Bond does so well is because they're not talking about what spies do. And so when people try to kind of dial that back and make it seem like it's real, that just drives me up the wall. It really does. And the same thing is true with battle scenes. Do some research. There's a lot of it out there. A lot of it is easy to find. At least get those facts relatively close. so that you're not just making stuff up out of thin air.
On that note, I think we all will probably have a thing that we are more skilled at or know more about, that's we would just kind of be like, I grew up on a dairy farm. If I see one more bumpkin guy with overalls who has an accent like every person who milks a cow is the dumbest person who, you know, stepped off the truck. I mean, you just kind of go, oh my God, this is just not you. It's your own background. So you kind of go, have a little more creativity than that. But I think everybody, you can't help, I guess I'll say that you don't know who your reader is and what their background's going to be and what they're going to know about. So don't slack off on something. Know your stuff, because especially if it's going to be your script, because you do not know your reader and what their background is and what they're going to call you on. So that would be on Tom's point there.
I would say that when I'm reading something that has to do with vampires or zombies or werewolves, it needs to be something that I couldn't even have possibly have imagined. It can't be recycled or, you know, just like, oh, it's just another werewolf movie. It's just like, it really has to be something special for me to love it. I will respectfully disagree with Tom about songs. This is a great debate. I've heard this debate on many a podcast where everything about your script is going to be changed by the producer, the names, the races, the dialogue, whatever. So if music is important and you have a vision and there are pieces that the music will help, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy was written with all of the music that, you know, I'm spacing on her name. Oh no, Nicole Perlman wanted. And I believe the director just put in his own, right? So she was in a different position than many of us are, but that doesn't bother me too much, especially when it's setting a tone. I'm never thinking, I'm throwing this out because there's
Actually,
no way
that's
they're going to get
exactly what I
licenses.
mean.
Okay, good, yeah.
If you're setting a tone with particular songs, then yeah, you need to include those, because that helps.
I'll back up there though. I've had people put songs in it stop me. I don't know that song. I'm not familiar at all. Now I have to go listen to it to figure out why the heck this is special to this. I mean, I'd rather hear somebody say it's a blues one or hip hop or or it's esque, you know, somebody esque. So I don't have to stop and look that, especially if it's something, you know, cutting edge I haven't heard, I got to go look it up. It can be a stopper for a reader, for me anyway. Sometimes.
And I think that's the caveat to go with it. If you're going to name songs, you better make sure that, you know, everybody, as close to everybody, knows what that song is. I did want to just comment. I saw the question about the Americans. The Americans was actually very highly researched, and they had 3 staff writers who actually had run agents. So yes, it was actually very well done. They took a compilation of a lot of events that had taken place over many, many years and shortened them and condensed them. But yes, it was actually a very good series. And in the intelligence community, it is far and away the favorite series out there.
Oh, and one more thing to add. If you are going to write a zombie movie or whatever, kind of like what you're saying, go watch all of them out there that are doing well, so that you know what you're competing with. You're not, you know what you have to be better than or more unique than. I mean, it is kind of frustrating when you see something go, they already did that in these 3 other movies and stuff like that. I mean, know your genre if you're going to write for that genre, I guess.
And if I could say one little thing too, which was hinted, Brian had mentioned, you know, what if, you know, Saving Private Ryan just came out and there's a movie that you want to write that's just like Saving Private Ryan? Your movie's not coming out for 4 to 6 years, if you're lucky. Right? So the one that just came out, not Saving Private Ryan, but the one that just came out will be forgotten about in 6 years.
All right, thank you. I see Kristen has popped up in my camera view here, which I think is my signal that we need to wrap things up. This has been a super fun evening. I really enjoyed talking with the 3 of you. I think we've got some great questions from the group. If other people have questions, we can certainly send them along. We have your guys' contact information. Kristen, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say how much I really enjoyed that. And thank you so much to Diane, Tom, and Jim for spilling your reader guts for us. So I hope everybody else found that information useful and that you'll use it to help elevate your own work. I also want to give a big hand to our moderator tonight, Brian, who will hopefully want to do more of these because he was great. So just a little shout out. The Northwest Screenwriters Guild is a partner with the Seattle Film Summit. So you can join us there either for the virtual portion, which is September 3rd through the 10th, or on the final day, September 11th, which will be in person. So there's films, panels for both screenwriting and filmmaking, depending on what you're interested in. There's table reads and pitches. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the schedule. And then there's also a discount in there if you're interested in purchasing tickets. So just once again, thank you to everybody. Brian, do you have anything else? Or Tom, Jim, Diane, any last words?
My wife, I think, is opening my office door. So
she said you're done.
Yeah, that's the bad signal right here.
All right.
No, thank you again, Tom, Jim, Diane. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I think we all learned a lot. It's been a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I just put my name and my my Twitter address in the chat, so please connect with me over Twitter.